Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Alina Rocha Menocal, and I am the director of the Thinking and Working Politically community practice. Thanks so much for tuning in. For the summer 2026 edition of the Thinking and Working Politically community practice newsletter, I have the pleasure of speaking with Edgar Ortiz Romero, who has been very active in the struggle to deepen the quality of democracy in Guatemala, especially in relation to the judicial sector. Edgar is a lawyer by training, and he's the founder of Poder Ciudadano, an initiative dedicated to strategic litigation, promoting the rule of law, and advocating for constitutional reforms. Edgar has a law degree from the Francisco Marroquín University in Guatemala, a master's degree in economics from the Rey Juan Carlos University in Madrid, and a master's degree in law from Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., where he was a Fulbright scholar. And he was also a visiting scholar at the Law Library of the U.S. Congress. Edgar has written a book recently titled The Constitution of Guatemala, What Could Have Been and What Is, which was published by Random House in 2026. And he's a frequent contributor to international scholarly journals and other media. You are so welcome, Edgar, and I'm so happy that you can join us today.
Thanks for having me, Alina.
Fantastic. Before we jump in with all the questions that I have for you, I wanted to start by providing some background around the recent judicial elections in Guatemala, which included, as you know, elections for the Supreme Electoral Tribunal, the Constitutional Court, and the Attorney General and head of the Public Prosecutor's Office, just because there's so much there that we need to explain to our readers and listeners. These elections are critically important because they will determine whether the 2027 presidential, congressional, and subnational elections in Guatemala can be free and fair, which will have profound implications for years to come for either democratic renewal in Guatemala or further autocratic entrenchment and democratic backsliding. The judicial elections in Guatemala are extraordinarily complex and have involved a plethora of actors, including the President of Guatemala, the University of San Carlos, which is the largest public university in Guatemala, as well as private universities, the Guatemalan Bar Association, of which Edgar is a member, the Guatemalan Congress, and the Supreme Court of Justice. All of these different actors come with different interests, incentives, motivations, political patrons, and supporters, including from within the international community. And they are locked in often fraught dynamics between powerful blocs bent on preserving impunity at all costs, actors committed to democratic deepening and progressive change like Edgar, and a whole range of more opportunistic actors in between who are willing to support either camp depending on where they see their fortunes will be best served. Guatemala arrived at these judicial elections in 2026 with a fragile balance of power. While President Bernardo Arévalo was able to win the 2023 election and take office in 2024 through a broad coalition that included reformist political parties, as well as progressive civil society organizations, indigenous groups, smallholder farmers, independent media, students and academics, among others, his support base has been shrinking ever since. And an important implication of this is that if and when pro-impunity actors do manage to come together as a united front to preserve interests they perceive as existential, for instance, in response to efforts to strengthen the rule of law or sustain campaigns to hold power holders to account, they can become quite formidable forces to be reckoned with. All of this has important implications on the rule of law, civic space, corruption and impunity, and the quality of democracy in Guatemala, more generally for years to come. And this is why these elections have generated such interest both within Guatemala and among international actors. My understanding is that the worst possible outcome, the capture of all three bodies, the Electoral Tribunal, the Constitutional Court, and the Public Prosecutor's Office, by pro-impunity actors has not come to pass. Instead, Instead, what seems to be emerging is a 50 shades of gray kind of situation where opportunistic candidates may dominate the composition of the three bodies. And the game becomes to understand and navigate that uncertainty and complexity and to seek to nudge their incentives so that they align more towards the pro democracy than the pro impunity camp. And what I'm hoping to discuss with Edgar today is how that worst case scenario of complete capture was averted, especially in relation to what the Bar Association was able to do in this respect. And I want our listeners to know and viewers to know that Edgar was a central figure in this struggle. So,
Mm.
um, uh, many congratulations to you, Edgar, and for all the efforts that you have been working on. Let's perhaps start with understanding really what the Bar
Mm.
Association, what kind of role the Bar Association has played in these elections. Why is it such an important player? And yeah, and we can go from there.
Sure. Thanks for having me again, Alina, and thanks for your words. And well, the first thing we have to say is that the Guatemalan Bar Association is not like any other bar association in other country, because the Bar Association in Guatemala has a little role in overseeing the quality of the lawyers who join the bar association. It has little impact on enforcing ethical rules, but instead, it's a very powerful body when it comes to judicial elections, as you mentioned in your introduction. So the Bar Association, we have a very broad constitutional provision that gives universities a lot of freedom of teaching freedom, which in practice means you have 13 law schools in Guatemala who can um, uh, two schools of law, 13 schools of law, and there are some of those universities who are very low quality, and the Constitution practically forces the Bar Association to accept them, all of them. And that means the Bar Association has roughly 47,000 lawyers, and
47,000.
47,000. And as I said before, I don't know, half of those lawyers have probably uh, I graduated from these schools who do not provide high quality education. So one obstacle you have is that in order to win an election in the bar association, you have to fight against very powerful coalitions. So in practice, the bar association plays a vital role in public life because they have the power to sit on different nominating committees, including the Supreme Court, the Public Prosecutor's Office. We appoint directly members of the Constitutional Court. So this big power that the Bar Association has made it a central focus
Right.
of power during the last 4 years.
So basically, the Bar Association has a role to play in that it has the power to nominate candidates for all these three judicial bodies as a group that brings together thousands, tens of thousands of lawyers, as you're saying, all with different kinds of persuasions and visions. So, but as an or entity, it puts forward and it can postulate different candidates to these three different bodies, which is why it plays a really important role in ultimately determining the composition of these bodies, right? So maybe now we can get into the detail of what you were talking about. Given that it's such a massively large organization, I'm assuming that not everybody sees eye to eye, and that there are a lot of different constellations of power internally that are important to understand. So, can you tell us a little bit about the different groupings and factions that were active during the 2026 elections? What kinds of candidates did they each support, and how? And what was the balance of power between these different groupings, and why was this important in the end? And it would be good to sort of understand how you saw the balance of power between camps like yours, which were clearly for democratic reform and the rule of law, and other presumably very powerful factions as well that were, much more aligned with sort of the dark forces, as one would say in Guatemala, of sort of pro-impunity, corruption, even organized crime interests. So if you can tell us a little bit about that internal dynamic, how it played out, and how you saw the balance of power eh, shifting or not shifting, and determining really who was able to make the nominations that were needed. Thank you.
Maybe I have to give some context before for our listeners because I mean, the power that the Bar Association has comes from our uh, 1985 Constitution. And so from 1985 to 2003, the Bar Association was a small body because, players back then were learning the new rules. And when they learned the new rules, I mean, when they learned the power that universities have and the Bar Association had,
Mhm.
they started taking control of these key spaces in the Bar Association. So from 2003, where we had a legal reform that came from Congress, this reform was, I mean, the excuse was that they were trying to um, make more democratic the elections, to make the elections at the bar association more democratic. So this provision, this new law, forced bar associations to hold elections nationwide. So before that, elections took place only in the capital city. So with this, elections became more expensive over and over because the body of lawyers were
mean, you
growing.
mean internal elections within the Bar Association?
Yes, because by 2003, maybe elections, I mean, you have probably 5,000 lawyers in the whole country. Now you have 47,000. So what happened is that from 2003 to 2015, we had back then, I think, six law schools, and then the number increased to 12.
Mm.
And during that period, the body of lawyers was growing very rapidly, and campaigns became very expensive. And at some point, you could see how the link between organized crime, political parties in Congress became increasingly important. So the bar association, when it holds the election, normally you wouldn't believe that it is a election among lawyers because what you will see is very expensive events, very expensive parties. They even they spend a lot of money giving presents to lawyers to convince them to join a group.
So
And
these are elections, internal elections within the bar for internal positions in the bar.
for different positions, some elections are
You,
for internal positions. For example, we have a board of directors that is elected every 2 years.
hmm
This board of elections is very important, but it gives you control of the daily life of the bar association, which in practice means these groups that are seeking to win power and influence, they can control the bar association and they can basically
mm,
hold control over the offices of the bar association in the whole country. And then you have elections, as we mentioned before, from time to time to select representatives from the bar association that are sitting in these judicial election committees.
okay. And
So
those are expensive, as you say, and then you start getting money from Congress or from different political patrons.
yes, I have I mean, I have a number that I came up not by myself, but some rivals told me that they spend nearly 300,000 pounds in a campaign. It's a 2 month
No.
campaign,
For
and
an
they
internal
normally.
position within the bar. Wow.
Yeah, so you're speaking of an election where maybe 15,000 lawyers are voting, and you're spending 300,000 pounds just for a 3 month campaign. That gives you an idea of how influential the bar association is and how much money dark forces are willing to invest in these efforts. So what happened during the last 20 years is that these uh, groups with ties with organized crime, with political parties, became increasingly powerful and they took control of the bar association. And
Mm.
virtually most elections from 2005 or 6 until 2024 were controlled by them. Until 2024, when we started articulating a diverse body of lawyers, from indigenous groups, from human rights defenders, from academia, I mean, members of academia, and other pro democracy groups, pro rule of law groups, that we were able to um, be competitive. And we won on very important elections in 2024 regarding these judicial committees. But
What made it possible for you guys to win those elections, if I may ask you, given the constellation of power that you're talking about and the fact that you were up against what could have been formidable opponents internally, not only in terms of their power, but also their power to intimidate you lot as well, right? So can you discuss that a little bit? How you were able to win those elections?
So the key answer is mobilization. I mean, we were able. I mean, I think there are various factors. One factor was in 2023, the uh, Alejandro Yamatei's government, which was a very authoritarian government, they lost the election to a pro-democracy candidate, Bernardo Arevalo, who is now the president. And back then, the prosecutor's office tried to overcome the elections by using criminal law as an excuse to invalidate the general election. And
Overturn the elections, yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
to return the election. So myself and a group of lawyers we brought a lawsuit before the Constitutional Court, and we won the case, and we were able uh, to protect the election result before the Constitutional Court, which was very hard because the Constitutional Court was not a democratic actor, was more aligned with the autocratic coalition, but they were seeing that the streets were packed with people protesting against these movements by the prosecutor's office. So they had no choice but to protect the election, and that gave us, a momentum as a group, and many lawyers who never voted before understood the importance of these elections. That was one key factor, and a second key factor was that we were able to mobilize people by using social media, and we became increasingly active in social media. I use a lot of TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and other platforms, and we could mobilize a lot of young lawyers who never voted in the bar association. So we increased the turnout by I don't know, in 2024, 33% of the lawyers voted, and before that, normally
But
15
in
or 20%.
2024, 33%, one in three lawyers. Oh, that's huge.
That's huge. But before that, only 20% or less voted before, and on average. And by 2026, was January of this year, we increased the turnout to 50%. One in two lawyers were voting by January. So we play we use social media to mobilize and to make people aware of the importance of these elections. And one thing that happened that was very, very beautiful to see was that these elections that were normally only issue for lawyers became a popular thing, and so a lot of people who were not members of the bar association were speaking of these elections, and this gave a momentum that was important to beat those groups. So you can classify most of the groups competing for these positions in the bar association as some groups openly autocratic and openly linked with organized crime, and other groups which I label as transactional groups, groups that are trying to gain some influence and power in the bar association, just because if they are able to appoint justices, then they are able to charge money for bribes and use the justice system for personal enrichment. And what was key also in the battlefield to win was that these two groups, the more radical autocratic groups and the transactional groups, were divided. In the past, they usually were more aligned with each other, but
Mm.
given the unpopular, given how unpopular the autocratic coalition was, the transactional coalition was not willing to join them because they saw this as a liability, and that allowed us to win because when they were divided among each other, we were able to score more votes than them.
That's really interesting. So the first election that you win or that the pro-democracy bloc wins is 2024 and then
Right.
again 2026. And there's this internal division that you talk about. How, how did you feel the relations were internally between the three different groupings that you're outlining, and what kinds of tensions and concerns might you have had, for example, from your side of the house in a way, given that some of this is quite tense, I imagine, or frightening. So how did you manage those things?
It wasn't easy. I mean, we won three elections in a row, actually, 2024, 2025 for the board of directors of the Bar Association, but also in 2026, this series of elections that were held in January and February. But in 2025, for example, they they imprisoned one of the members of our group during the campaign, and the reason behind it, that's of course they were trying to intimidate the group, but also they were trying to make this absurd legal case that elections in the bar association, when you're electing the board of directors, which has 7 members, I guess, normally you vote for a slate. So you elect one slate, which if the slate wins, all 7 members are elected. So they imprisoned one of them, and they were making the case that, well, since one of your members is in jail, you cannot take
Mm,
control of the board of directors. And in the end, they lost in court, but they were trying to use all the tools they had to intimidate us and to try to overturn the elections. And they repeated the same playbook in 2026, and they were trying to disqualify voters. But they were using the voter suppression technique, because one thing that I didn't mention is, for some reason, I mean, it's very, the explanation is very long, but for some reason in Guatemala, uh, the constitution uh, says that it is mandatory to join a bar association, no matter what your profession is. So political scientists and I think philosophers and other professions join the bar association only to comply with this legal obligation. So normally in the past, they could also vote for these
mm,
positions. And what they did was that they found out that these groups were voting in very high rates for us, and they disqualified them with a ruling. They use the justice
mm,
system. They issue an emergency injunction 2 days before the election to disqualify 2,000 voters, and they lost. Even using those tools, so they try everything they had in to affect us, but they couldn't succeed. But the explanation is legitimacy. I think that one thing that is very different from other countries is that we have unpopular authoritarians, and that was also key for the success of pro-democracy groups. We understood that they were unpopular, and our biggest challenge was to survive. How can we survive? How can we not end in jail, all of us, until the day of the election was our biggest concern, and we managed to do it. And okay, we can speak more about this, but when we won the election for the Constitutional Court, for example, the Bar Association elects 2 members, 2 of 10 members, and our 2 members were, were intimidated by the prosecutor's office. They were, run in to manufacture a criminal case against them, and they had to basically hide for 2 months. For two
mm,
months, I'm speaking from the day they were elected to the day they were sworn in office. And I myself, I had to flee the country for 2 months also, because they were trying to come after me, because they saw me as, as a too noisy in the social media and part of the campaign in the bar association. And to me, those were the biggest challenges. And it's not easy to survive in an authoritarian regime. And sometimes you need to find um, uh, back channels to communicate with authoritarian leaders and say, hey, I'm not a radical extremist or whatever. And also, you need to not look so dangerous, because the reason they allowed us to run in the first place was that they thought we were um,
who's they here in this instance?
the authoritarian coalition. They thought we were
Within the
unpopular
bar, within the bar.
within the bar, and also, the authorities who were also able to, for example, disqualify us by a ruling, or some other tools. They allow us to participate in the first place because they thought we couldn't win. They were pretty sure. They told me in December, "You're not winning. I mean, you can run, you will lose." And I say, "Yes, of course, I think so," because you don't want to sound so dangerous for them, and that was the key. They underestimated us in January, and that was key. If they thought that we were going to win, I am pretty sure they wouldn't allow us to run in the first place.
So what did you guys when you won like your faction within the Bar Association won the decisive vote to make the nominations to the court to the Constitutional Court? And what else did your bloc manage to get the upper hand on within the bar?
So there were two key elections this year in the Bar Association. Um, so the first one took place in January. In January, we elected uh, two representatives out of 10 uh, to the committee that nominated justices of the Supreme Election Tribunal.
Okay.
So I myself was elected, and a friend, two
So
members.
the two nominations that came from the bar were won by progressive candidates like yourself and your colleague.
And
Okay.
my colleague, yeah.
So two out of
So
10 of the composi committee to nominate were won by the progressive wing of the bar and therefore uh, gave quite a boost to that committee. Okay.
But to be honest, what happened was, I mean, when we ran in December, and the election took place in January, but the campaign started in December, we thought we were the key vote for this committee. That was our expectation that if we, for some reason, could be able to win this election in January, that we will be two relevant votes among other members of the committee, because other members of the committee came from the public university and private universities.
Mhm.
It's a very crazy design, by the way. Very, very, very strange for foreign observers. But what happened was that I think that they allow us to run, and they didn't do anything when we won because they were able to manage to seat. I mean the authoritarian coalition or transactional coalition too. They were able to make sure that no other pro democracy members were in that commission.
Mm,
So they made this very aggressive movement in January when they realized we were in the runoff, and when they realized we were we were winning. I mean, it was obvious by January that we were winning. We scored 2,000 votes more than the next slate in the first round, and they say, okay, they're winning in the runoff. So the authoritarian coalition, the transactional coalition, made an alliance in this committee to make sure that other members of the universities were now pro democracy. So
I see.
that was a mechanism they used to kind of put us, on hold. And even in that situation, we were able to nominate good lawyers to this to the election tribunal. But it wasn't a huge victory we were expecting, because we thought the universities will hold and nominate pro democracy groups. And the same is true for the Constitutional Court. In February, we held this election, the most important election of the year for us, because we changed. Okay, this is crazy. We changed the 10 members of the Constitutional Court every 5 years, all of them. One is nominated by the president, who was a pro democracy member. Uh, Another one was nominated by the Bar Association, and we won those seats, which means that two members of the court were pro democracy. So you had other three nominating organs, which were Congress, the public university, and the Supreme Court of Justice. And what we saw is that the public university nominated a more authoritarian transactional member. The Supreme Court nominated a more authoritarian member, and the big question was Congress. And
Mm.
at last minute, Congress appointed a very transactional member of the court, which means that we were in the minority. And also, that explains why they allowed our candidates to be sworn in office in the first place. I'm pretty sure if they saw that they were losing Congress too, probably they would play a more aggressive approach against us in that election too.
Okay. But so from what you're saying, within the Bar Association, the progressive slate or wing was able to win those the right to nominate um, um, judicial figures for both the tribunal, electoral tribunal, and for the constitutional court. So within the bar itself, however you played the power game there, and you managed to get the upper hand and make the nominations for that were actually going to be pro-democracy. What about the Attorney General and the Ministerial Public Office? What was the role of the Bar Association in that one?
So that is also an important role. So to nominate the public prosecutor's office, the head of the public prosecutor's office, we have again a nominating committee, and this nominating committee uh, is composed by 13 members, and sorry, by 15 members, and it's very easy to understand where those members come from. So since by February, when the committee was summoned, we had 12 schools of law. The Constitution says that all members, I mean, each member of each law school, that each dean of each law school sits in that committee. So you have 12 members of the 12 law schools that were back then in existence in Guatemala. And then you have the president of the Supreme Court of Justice. Those are 13 members. But the other two remaining seats come from the Bar Association itself, but you don't hold an election. Those seats are for the president of the board of directors of the Bar Association, which was elected with our group last year in 2025, and the other member of the ethics committee of the Bar Association, which was not part of our group, but I mean, she is a decent lawyer who won the election last year also. So that means that we have at least two votes from the Bar Association in the nominating committee, and also that gave us a very important role in preventing the majority for nominating
Mm,
terrible candidates for the prosecutor's office, because the
yes.
Constitution says that you need two-thirds of the votes to nominate someone to the public prosecutor's office. So, with the seats of the Bar Association and other, pro-democracy deans of the law schools, we were able to avoid a catastrophic scenario in the commission.
Yeah. So can I ask you, I mean, because you said earlier that part of the reason why you were able to get as far as you did as the progressive sort of slate or faction within the Bar Association was because um, the pro-impunity camp, let's say, underestimated you. But now that they see what you have been capable of, what do you think is going to happen going forward? What are some of the risks and implications of your own success in a way?
That is actually a very good question, and I am not sure I have the right answer yet, because the events are unfolding. And okay, by now, I mean, by July 2026, we still have a pro-democracy president in office, which is good. Also, we have I will say, a leaning pro-democracy election tribunal, which means that 2027 elections will be free and fair. Although the Constitutional Court, which is very powerful in our system, they have the power to interfere with with the decision of the election tribunal, which means that elections may not be as free and fair as we would like to. But our biggest question is what the outcome of the 2027 election will be, and that, I think, will determine the fate of our movement, because we only play a small role in the justice system as lawyers. But also, I mean, if we don't have a pro-democracy candidate on the
You
ballot
mean
next
you
year,
mean the presidential elections in 2027? Or
yes,
yes.
because now we also, and which is more important in your question, is we have now a decent head of the public prosecutor's office, which gives us a lot of oxygen as a group. We are no longer facing prosecution for arbitrary prosecution as we were 3 months ago, which is very important. So by now we have oxygen as pro-democracy groups in the Bar Association, but also in other efforts we are endeavoring, like the judicial reform we are promoting now. The big question is what will happen in 2027. And I think that explains what our expectations are, because if people elect a more autocratic leader, maybe the progress we made this year will be erased.
Mm.
So it's a big if what happens in 2027 election.
So there has been a pause in the weaponization of the judicial sector against you guys for now.
For now, and
But one has to see how long that. But you actually were at the receiving end of the weaponization of the judicial system for a while, so it must feel very nice that that it's now not acting in that way. But yes, as you say, there's a lot of stake at stake and of stake in the 2027 presidential election in Guatemala, and yeah, who knows what may come. That's interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about, reflecting back on all of this experience, what emerged as the key lessons for you um, uh, as a participant and a leader of many of these processes within the Bar Association?
well, one big lesson is you need to build coalitions, and that's probably my approach. But I am a minimalist, and I say when you're facing this powerful autocratic leaders, you need to be very aware of what your goals are. And I know, and this is very hard for some other, other groups that are promoting, interest groups which are legitimate. For example, uh, the indigenous groups play a vital role in this election. Indigenous lawyers play a vital role, and I know they are fighting for indigenous rights, but it's maybe we cannot achieve the level of advanced indigenous rights as we like in this moment, in this stage of the democratic backsliding we're facing. So convince other groups that we need to lower expectations or lower demands is very important, and it's not easy to convince groups of that. And at some point some people get desperate, saying, what, I'm lowering my expectations, but we're still fighting, and maybe they will overturn our election. But it's I think it's the most valuable lesson I learned during this process. And I think that when you lead with example and you lower yourself also your demands, other groups say, okay, I will join you just to fight the worst outcome possible, the worst possible outcome. And to me, that's key. I don't know how it plays in other countries, but I think it's the lesson that may be valid too. Because what we have seen is that they will try to find some loop in your narrative to accuse you of being globalist, ultra progressive, or whatever. So you need to be careful of the language you use. For example, that's another lesson I learned. I consider myself progressive, but I need to speak a language that resonates with people who are maybe not as progressive as we are. But even if they are conservative or center leaning, they will feel more. They will feel more confidence in a group that speaks a. I don't think neutral language exists, but a more inclusive kind of
Inclusive,
language.
yeah. So I
Uh,
think what you're saying is you need to build coalitions, but also the process of building coalitions entails some kind of a minimum that you agree on, and a lot of compromise and pragmatism around what you are willing to compromise on for pragmatic reasons to sort of win the bigger prize in a way without diluting what you could win because there's too much pressure on winning the whole big thing, right? So I mean that's what I hear you saying, and I think that's a really interesting lesson. Um, Edgar, I wonder if before closing, I can ask you about the kind of support that the international community can provide to individuals and groups like yourself who have put themselves on the line of fire and have in a way put their lives in danger, or at least at the possibility of getting the judicial system against you and all of these things, when this was the case. So what would you say, if you had a key message for the international community, what would you say would be effective ways for them to support the kind of work that you and groups like you try to do in Guatemala?
I think that one important way of supporting our groups is to provide them, spaces where we can build networks among ourselves, especially that resources are scarce, and sometimes just find a place to meet, or it's very irrelevant for us. I mean, we have no resources even to gather in a place, for example. That's one key thing. And then second is to provide protection at some point. I mean, many of us are aware that we may end up in exile, and it's also good to know that you have a place to go if you need to leave your country, because you are less willing to run a risk like this. You have no idea if you have any way to any place to go. And the third thing is maybe be less visible, which is very hard, because you're supporting the community, but you have to be less visible because you know the playbook of most authoritarian regimes is to blame international interference. So you don't want to be seen close to the international community, because that gives the opposition uh, tools to attack you and to discredit your movement. So maybe provide just basic things. I'm not speaking of huge resources for movement, but at least some spaces to build networks is what we can do now. Maybe in later stage, hopefully, if we recover democracy, we can speak of other more ambitious projects. But by now, I think that's what the international community can do for us.
So kind of quiet behind the scenes support that is not sort of flashing, look at us, we're doing this, we're doing that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Edgar, thank you so much. I don't know if you have any parting words for our audience, but I am honored to be able to do this interview with you, and really admire all of the efforts that you have undertaken to make Guatemala a sturdier democracy. So thank you for that. And yes, if you want to say anything else, please take advantage of your microphone.
Thank you. No, no, thank you. And I think it is. I mean, I feel solidarity for other, people in the world fighting the same fight as we are fighting in Guatemala. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I have met a lot of people who are in the same boat, and I want to say that you don't have to. I mean, it's very difficult to not lose hope, but I feel like living in a very difficult country like Guatemala, and that, you know have teach me a very important lesson. If you prevail, if you have confidence in the future, and if you are able to build coalitions and keep fighting, I think there's hope. And even though the conditions are not the best in our country, we never lose hope. And I invite people who are fighting the fight to never lose hope.
That's a wonderful note to end on, to hope. Thank you so much, Edgar. Hasta
Thank you,
pronto.
Alina.
Gracias.
A ti.
Bye bye. Okay, great. I think we can stop the recording. I don't know. No?
Mm.